The elevator climbed 17 floors, and with each passing number, I felt my chest tighten. First day jitters, I told myself. Nothing more than the standard anxiety of walking into a new office, meeting new faces, learning new systems. But as the doors slid open with that familiar mechanical whisper, something in the air felt different. Charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Nexus Digital occupied the entire 17th floor of the glass tower downtown. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly in all directions, a maze of concrete and ambition that made me feel both invisible and exposed. I'd spent the weekend mentally preparing for this, my first real job at a mid-sized tech firm, a chance to finally use my computer science degree for something meaningful instead of freelance web design projects that barely paid rent. The receptionist, a woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair, smiled as I approached. "You must be Alex Chen. Welcome to Nexus." "Thank you. I'm excited to be here." The words came out steadier than I felt. "Perfect timing. Your manager should be finishing up his morning meeting soon. I'll take you to the development floor, get you settled at your desk, and then he'll give you the proper introduction to the team." My manager. For the past week, I'd been wondering what kind of person he'd be. The job posting had been vague. Collaborative leadership style, innovative problem solving, commitment to team growth. Corporate speak that revealed nothing about the actual human I'd be reporting to 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. We walked through an open office space filled with the gentle hum of productivity. Developers hunched over dual monitors, their fingers dancing across keyboards in that particular rhythm I recognized. The flow state where code became poetry. I'd always found comfort in spaces like this, where introverted minds could thrive without the pressure of constant social performance. "Here's your desk," the receptionist said, stopping beside a workstation near the windows. "Alex, this is Emma, your desk neighbor. Emma's been with us for 3 years." Emma looked up from her screen, pushing wire-rimmed glasses up her nose. She had the pale complexion of someone who spent more time under fluorescent lights than sunshine, and her smile was genuinely warm. "Welcome to the team. Fair warning, we're a caffeine-dependent species around here. The good coffee machine is on the 3rd floor, but there's a mediocre one in the break room if you're desperate." Noted. I settled into my chair, adjusting the height and testing the keyboard. The setup was clean, modern, 2 monitors, mechanical keyboard, ergonomic mouse. All the tools I needed to disappear into work, which had always been my preferred hiding place. "Your manager should be down any minute," the receptionist said. "In the meantime, Emma can show you where everything is." As she walked away, Emma swiveled her chair to face me. "So, what's your story? Where'd you work before this?" "Freelance mostly, small projects, local businesses. This is my first time at a company this size." I powered on my monitors, watching the Nexus logo appear. "What about you? Do you like working here?" "Love it. The work is interesting, the benefits are solid, and management actually listens when we have ideas or concerns." Speaking of which, she glanced toward the elevator bank. "Here comes the boss." I looked up, expecting to see a middle-aged executive in an expensive suit. Instead, my blood turned to ice water in my veins. 6'2", dark hair with subtle silver at the temples, broad shoulders that filled out a navy button-down shirt. The same strong jawline I remembered from high school hallways, though now softened slightly by time and what looked like genuine exhaustion. He moved with that same confident stride, not arrogant exactly, but certain of his place in the world, in a way I'd never been. Marcus Rivera. My new manager was Marcus fucking Rivera, the boy who'd made my junior and senior years of high school a carefully orchestrated form of social torture. Never anything dramatic enough to get him in real trouble. He was too smart for that. Just a steady stream of comments about my clothes, my voice, the way I carried my books, always delivered with that charming smile that made teachers and administrators think he was joking around with a friend. "You walk like a girl, Chen. Why don't you ever eat lunch with anyone? Too good for us? I bet you spend Friday nights alone, don't you?" Each comment like a paper cut, small enough to ignore individually but collectively drawing blood. He approached my desk with Emma hovering nearby, clearly eager to make introductions. But as his eyes met mine, I watched something shift in his expression. The professional smile faltered, his steps slowed. For just a moment, the confident mask slipped, and I saw something that looked almost like pain cross his features. Alex? His voice was deeper than I remembered and rougher around the edges. Alex, Chen, Marcus. I stood up, muscle memory from 18 years of conditioning, telling me to make myself smaller, less noticeable. But I was 28 now, not 17. I forced my shoulders back. Small world. Emma looked between us with obvious curiosity. You two know each other? We went to high school together, Marcus said, his voice carefully neutral. He extended his hand for a professional shake, and I noticed his fingers trembled slightly. It's been, what, 10 years? 11. I shook his hand, noting how his palm was warm and slightly damp. Nervous. Good. He should be nervous. The handshake lasted a beat too long before we both pulled away. Well, Emma said into the sudden silence, I'll let you two catch up. Alex, the bathroom is down that hall if you need it. She melted back to her desk with the practiced invisibility of someone who'd learned to read office dynamics. Marcus stood there for another moment, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Would you... He cleared his throat. Would you mind if we talked in my office? I'd like to go over your role here, introduce you to the rest of the team. Of course. I grabbed the notebook I'd brought, mainly to have something to do with my hands. Lead the way. His office was a corner space with windows on 2 walls, furnished with the kind of modern minimalism that suggested either very good taste or a professional decorator. A few framed photos on his desk, what looked like family gatherings, a shot of him crossing a finish line at some kind of race, a group photo with people I didn't recognize. No wedding ring, I noticed, though that didn't necessarily mean anything. He closed the door behind us and gestured to the chair across from his desk. I sat and he remained standing for a moment, looking out the window at the city below. I had no idea you'd applied here, he said finally. HR handles most of the initial interviews, and by the time they passed along the finalists, I only had last names and portfolios to review. He turned to face me. Your work is impressive, by the way. The e-commerce site you built for that bookstore downtown, clean code, intuitive interface, that's part of what made you stand out. Thank you. The words felt strange in my mouth. Marcus Rivera complimenting my work. The same boy who'd once loudly wondered if I was too weird to function in the real world. He sat down heavily in his chair, running a hand through his hair. Look, I realize this might be awkward. If you'd prefer to work on a different team, I can talk to HR. We have other development groups, and your skills would be valuable anywhere in the company. Are you trying to get rid of me already? The question came out sharper than I'd intended. No. His response was immediate, emphatic. No, that's not. I just want you to be comfortable here. I know that our history might make that difficult. Our history, as if we'd had some kind of mutual falling out, rather than one-sided cruelty. But there was something in his voice, a weight that hadn't been there when we were teenagers. Whatever had happened to Marcus Rivera in the intervening years, it had changed him. I'm here to do good work, I said finally. As long as you can be professional, I don't see why that would be a problem. He nodded, looking relieved. I can be professional. I am professional. A pause. I've been managing this team for 2 years. Before that, I was a senior developer here for 3 years. I know the code base inside and out, and I'm good at what I do. It wasn't bragging, just a statement of fact delivered with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from competence rather than ego. I studied his face, looking for traces of the boy who'd once made my life miserable. The basic features were the same, but everything else had been refined by time and apparently some hard-won wisdom. What exactly will I be working on? Relief flickered across his expression at the change of subject. We're developing a new customer portal for one of our biggest clients, a logistics company that handles supply chain management for mid-sized retailers. Your role will be primarily front-end development, but with some full-stack responsibilities as you get more familiar with our systems. For the next 30 minutes, he walked me through the technical details with the kind of clarity and depth that only comes from genuine expertise. His explanations were patient, thorough, and he had an intuitive grasp of how to present complex information in digestible pieces. Whatever else had changed about Marcus Rivera, he'd clearly found his calling in the tech world. Questions so far? He asked. The authentication system you described, are you handling that server side or is there a client side component? His eyes lit up. Good catch. We're using a hybrid approach. He leaned forward, sketching out the architecture on a notepad. And for a moment, I forgot who I was talking to. This was just one developer explaining elegant solutions to another developer, sharing the particular joy that comes from building something complex and functional. When he finished the explanation, he looked up to find me watching his face. Our eyes met and something electric passed between us. Not romantic exactly, but a recognition of shared passion. The kind of moment that happens when two people discover they speak the same language fluently. He cleared his throat and sat back. I'll introduce you to the rest of the team. We have a stand-up meeting in 20 minutes. The development team consisted of 8 people, including myself. Besides Emma, there was David, a back-end specialist with an impressive beard and a collection of vintage band t-shirts. Sarah, a QA engineer who spoke with the precise diction of someone who'd spent years documenting bugs. Michael, a junior developer fresh out of college, who looked at Marcus with obvious hero worship. Lisa, a senior developer with 15 years of experience and the kind of dry humor that made meetings bearable. Tom, a DevOps engineer who seemed to communicate primarily in server configuration haikus. And Jennifer, a UX designer whose workspace was covered in colorful sticky notes and sketches. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Alex Chen, our newest team member, Marcus said as we gathered around a standing desk in the center of the floor. Alex will be working primarily on the front end for the Meridian project, but he's got full-stack experience, so we'll probably be pulling him into various initiatives as we move forward. The introductions were warm but casual, the kind of workplace where people genuinely seem to like each other, which was rarer than it should have been in the tech industry. I found myself relaxing despite the surreal situation of working under my former tormentor. Alex, you're welcome to just observe today, Marcus said. We'll get you set up with access to our repositories and project management tools this afternoon. The stand-up was efficiently run, with each team member briefly describing what they'd accomplished yesterday, what they planned to work on today, and any blockers they were facing. Marcus listened attentively, asking clarifying questions and offering suggestions without micromanaging. His leadership style was collaborative, supportive, nothing like the controlling, ego-driven approach I might have expected from someone who'd once seemed to derive pleasure from others' discomfort. As the meeting wrapped up and people dispersed back to their desks, Marcus approached me. How was that? Any initial impressions? It seems like a good team, I said honestly. Everyone knows their role, communication is clear. No obvious personality conflicts. We've been lucky. Good chemistry is hard to find. He hesitated, then added, I hope you'll fit in well here. There was something vulnerable in the way he said it, as if my approval actually mattered to him. I studied his face, looking for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda, but found only what seemed like genuine concern for team dynamics. I'm sure I will, I said. The rest of the morning passed in the familiar rhythm of first-day logistics, setting up accounts, reading documentation, getting familiar with the codebase. Emma proved to be an excellent desk neighbor, answering my questions with patience and occasionally offering insights that weren't in any official documentation. Marcus is a really good manager, she mentioned during a brief lull around 11:30. I know some people find him a little intense, but he actually cares about our professional development. He sent 3 people from our team to conferences in the past year, and he fought with the C-suite to get us budget for that new testing framework we wanted. I nodded noncommittally. The Marcus she was describing bore no resemblance to the boy I'd known in high school, but people did change, sometimes. At lunch, I decided to explore the building rather than join the group heading to the sandwich place across the street. I needed some time alone to process the morning's revelations, and I'd always been more comfortable observing new social dynamics before jumping in. The break room on our floor was empty except for someone standing at the coffee machine with their back to me. I was halfway to the refrigerator when they turned around, and once again, I found myself face to face with Marcus. He had a ceramic mug in his hands, forest green with what looked like a logo from a 5K race. And for a moment, we just looked at each other in the kind of silence that feels loaded with unspoken history. Coffee's actually decent on this floor, he said finally. Emma wasn't entirely accurate about that. Good to know. I opened the refrigerator and pulled out the sandwich I'd brought from home, hyper-aware of his presence behind me. When I turned around, he was still standing there, cradling his mug like a shield. His eyes met mine, and this time he was the one who looked away first. That small victory felt disproportionately significant. Alex, he said, his voice softer than it had been all morning, I want you to know. He trailed off, seeming to struggle with whatever he'd been about to say. I waited, unwilling to make this easier for him. I remember you, from school. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back all morning. I remember you, and I remember how I was back then. I wasn't a good guy. To you or to anyone. Really, but especially to you. The admission hung between us like smoke. I'd imagined this moment countless times over the years. What I'd say if I ever encountered him again. How I'd make him understand the damage he'd caused. But now that it was actually happening, I felt strangely empty. Why? The question came out quieter than I'd intended. He set his mug down on the counter, his hands visibly shaking. I don't know. I mean, I do know, but there's no excuse for it. He looked up at me, and I saw something raw in his expression. I was angry all the time back then, at home, at school, at myself, and you were quiet and smart, and you seemed like you had your shit figured out in a way that I didn't. It wasn't fair and it wasn't right, but I think I resented that. So you decided to make me miserable. Yeah. The word was barely above a whisper. Yeah, I did, and I've regretted it for years. I studied his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or self-serving revisionist history. But there was something devastating in his honesty, a kind of naked remorse that was difficult to fake. Regret doesn't undo anything, I said. I know it doesn't. He picked up his mug again, wrapping his fingers around it like an anchor. I can't change what I did, and I can't change how it affected you, but I can promise you that I'm not that person anymore. People don't change that much. Some do. His voice was quiet but certain. Some of us have to. Before I could ask what he meant by that, the break room door opened and David walked in, his impressive beard preceding him into the room. Oh, hey guys, Alex, how's the first day treating you? Good, I managed. Just getting oriented. Marcus is a solid boss, David said, completely oblivious to the tension crackling between us. Doesn't micromanage, actually knows the technical side of things. Fights for his team when budget discussions happen. You lucked out. He grabbed a yogurt from the refrigerator and headed back toward the door. See you both at the 3 o'clock meeting. When he was gone, Marcus and I were alone again, but the moment had passed. Whatever fragile honesty had emerged between us had been interrupted, leaving us back in the awkward territory of former enemies trying to navigate professional politeness. I should get back to work, I said. Of course, and Alex? I paused at the door. If you ever want to talk about any of this, my door is always open. I nodded without committing to anything and made my escape. The afternoon flew by in a blur of code reviews and documentation. I threw myself into learning the system architecture, partly out of genuine interest and partly as a way to avoid thinking about the conversation in the break room. But even as I traced through function calls and database schemas, I kept hearing the vulnerability in Marcus's voice when he'd said, "Some of us have to." What had happened to him in the 11 years since high school? What had forced him to confront the cruel, careless boy he'd been and rebuild himself into someone capable of genuine remorse? At 6:30, most of the team had cleared out, but I stayed late to finish reviewing the authentication module Marcus had described that morning. The office took on a different quality after hours, quieter, more intimate, lit by desk lamps and the soft glow of monitors. I'd always been a night owl, and some of my best work happened when the distractions of the day faded away. I was deep in a particularly elegant piece of code when a shadow fell across my desk. Marcus stood there with his jacket slung over one arm, keys in his hand. You don't have to stay late on your first day, he said. This stuff will still be here tomorrow. I wanted to get a good grasp of the system before I started making changes, I replied without looking up from my screen. He hesitated, then pulled up David's empty chair and sat down beside me. Mind if I see what you're looking at? I angled my monitor toward him, and he leaned in to study the code. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, something subtle and clean, nothing like the aggressive body spray he'd worn in high school. Ah, you found the token refresh logic, he said. That was actually my favorite part to build. See how it handles the edge case where the user's session expires mid-request? For the next 20 minutes, He walked me through the more subtle aspects of the authentication system, explaining design decisions and pointing out areas where we'd had to make trade-offs between security and user experience. His explanations were clear and passionate, and I found myself genuinely impressed by the elegance of some of his solutions. "This is really well architected," I said when he finished. "How long did it take you to build?" "About 3 months, working nights and weekends. The client needed it fast, and the previous contractor had left them with a mess." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I was pretty much living here during that period." "No family obligations?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He shook his head. "Divorced 2 years ago. No kids." A pause. "What about you?" "Never married." I closed the file I'd been reviewing and turned to face him. "Why did you get into tech?" "Computer science major in college, like you. But honestly, I kind of fell into it by accident." He leaned back in David's chair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him all day. "I was planning to go into business, maybe work in my dad's construction company. But I took a programming class to fulfill a math requirement, and something just clicked." "When did you start managing people?" "About 4 years ago. I was a senior developer at my previous company, and they kept asking me to mentor junior developers. Turned out I was good at it." He smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "I like helping people grow, seeing them solve problems they didn't think they could handle." The Marcus sitting beside me bore almost no resemblance to the boy who delighted in making me feel small and worthless. This version seemed genuinely invested in others' success, comfortable with his own competence without needing to diminish anyone else. "I used to think I knew who I was," he said suddenly, his voice dropping to something more personal. "Yeah, what changed?" He looked at me for a long moment, something complicated passing across his features. "You showed up." The words hung between us, loaded with meaning I wasn't sure I was ready to unpack. Before I could respond, he stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. "I should let you get back to work," he said, the moment of vulnerability closing as quickly as it had opened. "See you tomorrow." I watched him walk away, my heart beating faster than it had any right to. What had he meant by that? That seeing me again had forced him to confront his past behavior, or something else entirely? I tried to return to the code review, but my concentration was shot. Instead, I found myself staring out the window at the city lights, thinking about the boy who'd made my life hell and the man who'd just shown me genuine kindness and respect. People could change, apparently, but that didn't mean I was ready to trust that change, no matter how compelling it seemed. The next few days fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. I arrived early, worked through lunch most days, and stayed late to make up for the learning curve of working with a new code base. The team was welcoming without being intrusive, and the work itself was engaging enough to keep me occupied. Marcus was a good manager despite my reservations. He gave clear direction without micromanaging, provided context for why certain decisions had been made, and seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts on how to improve various systems. During team meetings, he had a way of drawing out the quieter members' opinions while keeping more dominant personalities from steamrolling the discussion. But there was an undercurrent of tension between us that I couldn't ignore. Stolen glances across the office, the careful way we both avoided being alone together, the hyper-aware way I tracked his movements when he passed my desk. It wasn't attraction exactly, I wasn't ready to call it that, but it was something, and that something made me deeply uncomfortable. On Thursday afternoon, we had our first one-on-one meeting scheduled. I'd been dreading it all week, unsure how to navigate the professional necessity of regular check-ins with someone whose presence stirred up so many complicated emotions. His office felt smaller with the door closed, the late afternoon sun been casting long shadows across his desk. He had a legal pad with handwritten notes, and I recognized my name at the top of the page. "How's your first week been?" he asked, settling back in his chair. "Good. The codebase is more complex than I expected, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm starting to see how all the pieces fit together." "Any concerns or questions so far?" "A few technical things, but nothing major. Emma's been helpful when I get stuck." He made a note on his pad. "What about the team dynamic? Are you feeling integrated?" "Yes. Everyone's been welcoming." I hesitated, then added, "It's a good group. You've built something solid here." Something flickered in his expression at the compliment. "Thanks. That means a lot. Coming from you." "Why?" He set down his pen and looked directly at me. Because you have good judgment about people. You always did, even in high school. You could see through the bullshit when the rest of us were too caught up in teenage drama to think clearly. I don't remember it that way. You wouldn't. You were dealing with your own stuff. He paused. I remember this one time, senior year, when Chad Morrison was bragging about cheating on that history exam. Everyone was laughing, treating it like some brilliant prank. But you looked disgusted, and you got up and left the room. You were the only one who seemed to understand that it actually mattered. I had no memory of that specific incident, but it sounded like something I would have done. You were paying attention to what I thought? More than you knew. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. I was always paying attention to you, Alex. That was part of the problem. Before I could ask what he meant by that, his computer chimed with a meeting reminder. The moment passed, and we spent the rest of our scheduled time discussing my upcoming assignments and long-term goals within the company. But as I walked back to my desk, his words echoed in my mind. I was always paying attention to you. What kind of attention? And why had that been a problem? Friday brought our first team social event since I'd started. Drinks after work at a gastropub a few blocks from the office. I almost begged off, but Emma convinced me it would be good for team building, and I had to admit she was right. If I was going to be part of this group, I needed to make an effort beyond just the professional minimum. The pub was crowded with the usual after-work crowd, all polished professionals decompressing from their week with craft beer and artisanal appetizers. Our team had claimed a large table in the back, and the conversation flowed easily between work topics and personal stories. I nursed a single beer and mostly listened, content to observe the group dynamics outside the office environment. David was funnier than I'd expected, with a talent for perfectly timed, dry observations. Sarah revealed a surprisingly adventurous side, regaling us with stories from a recent rock climbing trip. Even quiet Tom opened up, sharing his plans to propose to his girlfriend of 5 years. Marcus sat across from me, participating in the conversations but seeming slightly separate from the group, like someone who was friendly with his coworkers but maintained careful boundaries. I found myself studying him when I thought he wasn't looking, trying to reconcile the engaged team leader I'd observed all week with my memories of the cruel boy from high school. So Alex, Lisa said, pulling me back into the conversation, what do you do for fun when you're not debugging our code? I read a lot, cook when I have time. I've been taking photography classes on weekends. All true, if somewhat generic answers. What kind of photography? Jennifer asked. Mostly street photography. I like capturing candid moments. People going about their lives without knowing they're being observed. That sounds fascinating, Emma said. Do you have a portfolio online? I was about to answer when a voice interrupted from the neighboring table. Excuse me, are you guys software developers? We turned to see a man in an expensive suit with the kind of aggressive confidence that immediately put me on edge. He was clearly drunk, swaying slightly as he leaned over from his table. We might be, David said carefully. I fucking knew it, the man slurred. You can always tell. Bunch of antisocial nerds who can't function in the real world. The conversation at our table stopped abruptly. I felt my face flush with familiar shame. The same reaction I'd had in high school when faced with casual cruelty from people who saw my quietness as weakness. Sir, I think you might want to... Tom started, but the drunk man waved him off. No, I'm right about this. Look at them. His gaze swept over our table with obvious disdain. Probably never played a sport. Never talked to a girl without paying for it. Spend all day in dark rooms typing on computers because they can't handle actual human interaction. His eyes landed on me, and something in my expression must have satisfied him because he smiled nastily. That one especially. Look at him. Probably hasn't been laid in years. I felt myself shrinking, muscle memory from years of similar attacks taking over. But before I could fully retreat into myself, Marcus was on his feet. That's enough, he said, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of threat. Oh, look, the manager's going to defend his little team, the drunk man sneered. What are you going to do? Write me some angry code? Marcus stepped closer, and I was suddenly reminded that despite his professional demeanor, he was still 6'2" with the build of someone who stayed in shape. What I'm going to do is suggest you return to your table and finish your evening without bothering anyone else, and if that doesn't appeal to you, I can call the manager over and explain how you're harassing other customers. Something in Marcus's tone must have penetrated the alcohol haze because the man's swagger faltered slightly. He muttered something under his breath about Fucking nerds. But retreated to his own table. Marcus sat back down and the conversation gradually resumed, but I barely heard it. I was too busy processing what had just happened. Marcus Rivera, the boy who'd spent 2 years of high school making comments remarkably similar to what that drunk asshole had just said, had defended me. Not just me, but all of us. But his eyes had been on me when he'd stood up. After we paid the check and said our goodbyes, I found myself walking to the parking garage beside Marcus. The rest of the team had scattered to their various transportation methods, leaving us alone under the fluorescent lights. "Thank you," I said as we reached the elevator, "for what you did back there." He pushed the button for the third floor. "You don't need to thank me. That guy was an asshole. Still, I know you didn't have to do anything." The elevator doors closed, and Marcus leaned against the wall, looking suddenly exhausted. "Yes, I did. I absolutely had to do something." "Why?" He was quiet for so long that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then, just as the doors opened on the third floor, he said, "Because I used to be him, and I never want to be him again." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the elevator with my heart racing and my mind spinning. What had he meant by that? That he recognized his own past behavior in that drunk stranger, or something deeper? I drove home through the quiet city streets, my conversation with Marcus playing on repeat in my mind. The man who'd defended me tonight bore no resemblance to the boy who'd once made similar comments about my social skills and dating life. But that transformation didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen without reason. What had changed Marcus Rivera? And why did I find myself desperately wanting to know the answer? The following week brought a new project that required me to work more closely with Marcus on the technical specifications. We spent long hours in conference rooms, whiteboards covered with diagrams and architectural drawings, debugging complex integration issues that required both of our skill sets to solve. I began to understand why his team respected him so much. Marcus had the rare combination of deep technical knowledge and the ability to communicate complex concepts clearly. When I got stuck on a particularly thorny piece of legacy code, he didn't just give me the answer. He walked me through his thought process, helping me understand not just the solution, but the reasoning behind it. "Try thinking of it this way," he said during one of our afternoon sessions, moving to stand behind my chair so he could see my screen. "The authentication token isn't just a key, it's more like a temporary identity. Every request carries that identity forward, but it has an expiration date built in." He leaned over my shoulder to point at a specific line of code, and I caught another whiff of that subtle cologne. His proximity made my skin prickle with an awareness I didn't want to examine too closely. "See how this function validates not just the token's signature, but also checks the timestamp against the server clock?" His breath was warm against my ear. "That's the elegant part. It's automatically invalidating stale credentials without requiring any external cleanup processes." I forced myself to focus on the technical explanation rather than the fact that Marcus Rivera was close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "That's actually brilliant," I said, and meant it. "Thanks." He straightened up, putting some distance between us, but I could have sworn I felt him hesitate for just a moment. Once you understand that pattern, a lot of the other security modules will make more sense. As the days passed, I found myself looking forward to these collaborative sessions more than I cared to admit. There was something intoxicating about watching Marcus think through complex problems, the way his mind worked through possibilities and trade-offs with methodical precision. He had a gift for asking the right questions, not to show off his own knowledge, but to guide me toward insights I might not have reached on my own. But it wasn't just his technical skills that impressed me. It was the way he treated everyone on the team with genuine respect, how he remembered personal details about their lives and checked in when someone seemed stressed or overwhelmed. He'd somehow learned to wield his natural confidence in service of others rather than at their expense. I found myself studying him when he wasn't looking, trying to map the journey from the cruel boy I'd known to the thoughtful man sitting across from me. The changes weren't just surface-level polish or professional necessity. Something fundamental had shifted in him, and I was beginning to suspect it hadn't been an easy transformation. On Wednesday evening, we were the last two people in the office, putting the finishing touches on a client presentation that was due the next morning. The building had taken on that after-hours quiet, broken only by the hum of servers in the data center and the distant sound of traffic 17 floors below. I think that covers all the technical requirements, Marcus said, saving the presentation file. Want to run through it once more to make sure the flow makes sense? Sure. I pulled up the slides on my monitor, and we spent the next 30 minutes refining transitions and making sure our explanations would be accessible to non-technical stakeholders. The presentation was solid, clear, comprehensive, and showcasing some genuinely innovative solutions to the client's logistics challenges. This should do it, I said, closing the laptop. They'll be impressed. Marcus nodded, but he didn't move to pack up his things. Instead, he sat back in his chair, watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The office felt smaller in the silence, intimate in a way that daylight and bustling activity usually prevented. Alex, he said finally, his voice softer than usual. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you remember the winter formal our senior year? I paused in gathering my papers. Vaguely. Why? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the conference table. You went alone. I remember seeing you there in that dark blue suit, standing by the punch bowl looking like you'd rather be anywhere else. The memory came back slowly. I'd gone alone, partially out of stubborn pride, and partially because I'd never learned how to navigate the complicated social dynamics of asking someone to a school dance. I'd spent most of the evening trying to be invisible, counting the minutes until I could leave without seeming pathetic. I wanted to ask you to dance, Marcus said quietly. I stood there for 20 minutes, working up the courage, and then Derek Matthews made some comment about how pathetic you looked, and he stopped, running a hand through his hair. I laughed. I agreed with him. And then I watched you leave early, and I hated myself for the rest of the night. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. You wanted to ask me to dance? Yeah? His smile was sad, tinged with regret. I did, but I was 17 and terrified and convinced that wanting to dance with Alex Chen meant something I wasn't ready to face. The implications of his words hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. All those cruel comments, the pointed cruelty, the way he'd seemed to single me out for punishment, had it really been about his own internal struggle? I don't understand, I said. I didn't understand it then either. I think I was afraid of you, of what I saw in you, that I wouldn't let myself feel. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table, close enough that I could see the earnestness in his eyes. You were comfortable with being different. You didn't seem to need anyone's approval. And that scared the hell out of me because I needed everyone's approval. I thought about the boy I'd been at 17, quiet, bookish, invisible by choice rather than circumstance. I'd never thought of myself as particularly brave or self-assured. If anything, I'd felt like a fraud most of the time, pretending to be above the social hierarchies because I'd never figured out how to participate in them. I wasn't comfortable, I said. I was just resigned. Maybe, but you never compromised yourself to fit in. You never pretended to be someone you weren't just to make other people like you. His voice was quiet, intense. I spent 4 years of high school being whoever I thought people wanted me to be, and somehow watching you refuse to do the same made me hate you and admire you in equal measure. The honesty in his voice was devastating. I wanted to be angry, to tell him that his internal conflict didn't excuse the pain he'd caused me. But sitting there in the quiet office, seeing the genuine remorse in his expression, I found that the anger I'd carried for so many years was beginning to shift into something more complicated. So you decided to tear me down instead, I said. Yeah, I did. He didn't try to excuse it or minimize it. I was a coward, and you paid the price for my cowardice. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken history settling between us. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the small reconciliation happening 17 floors up. I used to wonder what I'd done wrong, I admitted. Why you seemed to hate me so much when we'd never really interacted before. Marx's face crumpled slightly. You didn't do anything wrong, not a single thing. The problem was entirely mine. I know that now, but I didn't then. I'm sorry. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I'm so fucking sorry, Alex, for all of it. For being too much of a coward to deal with my own shit without making it your problem. I studied his face, looking for any trace of manipulation or self-serving narrative. But there was nothing there except naked honesty and a kind of pain that suggested he'd been carrying the weight of his actions for a long time. Thank you, I said finally, for telling me. He nodded, then started gathering his papers. I should let you get home, it's getting late. But as he reached the door, he paused with his hand on the handle. If I could go back, I'd do a lot of things differently. Starting with you. The words hung in the air between us, loaded with meaning and possibility. I didn't know what to say. The office was quiet, broken only by the distant hum of the building's ventilation system. The glow from my monitor still painted shadows across the room. And for the first time since I'd started working here, we weren't boss and employee. Just two men with too much history and something quietly blooming between them. Marcus seemed to be waiting for a response, but I had no words for the tangle of emotions his confession had unleashed. Before I could find my voice, he gave a small nod and disappeared into the hallway, leaving me alone with the echo of his words and the sudden, unexpected ache in my chest. Part 2, I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at nothing and trying to process what had just happened. Marcus Rivera, the boy who'd made my junior and senior years a careful dance of avoidance and humiliation, had just told me he'd wanted to ask me to dance at our winter formal, that his cruelty had been born from fear and self-hatred rather than genuine malice. The rational part of my mind insisted that it didn't matter, that understanding the psychology behind his behavior didn't undo the damage it had caused. But another part of me, a part I'd tried to bury years ago, was reeling with the implications of his words. I drove home through the quiet streets, Marcus's voice echoing in my head. I think I was afraid of you, of what I saw in you, that I wouldn't let myself feel. What had he seen? And what hadn't he let himself feel? The next morning's presentation went flawlessly. Our client was impressed with both the technical solutions and the clear way we'd presented complex information. Marcus handled most of the talking, but he made sure to highlight my contributions and even deferred to my expertise when they asked detailed questions about the user interface design. Watching him in full professional mode was mesmerizing. He commanded the room without dominating it, listened as intently as he spoke, and had an intuitive grasp of what information each person needed to hear. This was Marcus at his best. Confident, competent, genuinely invested in solving problems rather than proving his own intelligence. After the clients left, the team gathered in the conference room for a brief debrief. The mood was celebratory. We'd not only met every one of their requirements, but had proposed several enhancements that could streamline their operations significantly. Great work, everyone, Marcus said, looking around the table. Alex, especially strong work on the front-end mock-ups. The visual flow really helped them understand how the system would work in practice. I felt a familiar flush of pride at the recognition, but there was something else there too. A warmth that had nothing to do with professional validation and everything to do with the way Marcus's eyes lingered on mine when he said it. The rest of the day passed in a blur of follow-up emails and project planning. I caught myself watching Marcus more than I should have, studying the way he moved through conversations with team members, how he balanced authority with accessibility. He had all the words now, I realized. But the way he looked at me said more than any of them. That evening, Emma mentioned that it was Jennifer's birthday and several team members were planning to grab dinner and drinks to celebrate. You should come, she said as we were packing up. It'll be fun, and Jennifer specifically asked if you'd be there. I was about to decline. Social events still made me anxious, and I was emotionally drained from trying to navigate the complicated undercurrents between Marcus and me. But something made me change my mind. Maybe it was the realization that I genuinely liked these people. Or maybe it was the possibility of seeing Marcus in a more relaxed setting. Sure, I said. Where are we meeting? The restaurant was a trendy place in the Arts District, the kind of spot with exposed brick walls and an ambitious cocktail menu. Our group had claimed a long table near the back, and the conversation flowed easily between work gossip and personal stories. I found myself sitting across from Marcus, who seemed more relaxed than I'd seen him since my first day. He laughed at David's increasingly ridiculous stories about his college roommate, offered thoughtful questions about Sarah's weekend hiking plans, and even shared a surprisingly funny anecdote about his failed attempts to learn how to cook during his divorce. The smoke alarm went off so many times that my neighbors started checking on me, he said, grinning. Finally, Mrs. Chen from downstairs brought me a rice cooker and a stack of frozen meals. She said she was tired of worrying I was going to burn the building down. Mrs. Chen sounds like a saint, Lisa said. She is. She still invites me over for dinner once a month to make sure I'm not surviving entirely on takeout. As the evening progressed, I found myself drawn into conversations I normally would have avoided. Jennifer was genuinely interested in my photography, and we spent 20 minutes discussing different techniques for street photography. Tom turned out to share my love of science fiction, and we discovered a mutual obsession with a book series most people found incomprehensibly dense. But throughout it all, I was hyper aware of Marcus's presence across the table, the way he listened when other people talked, the careful way he avoided drinking too much, how his eyes found mine at unexpected moments during the conversation. There was something different about him in this setting, less guarded, more present. After dinner, someone suggested moving the party to the rooftop bar of a nearby hotel. The view is incredible, Jennifer said, and it's a beautiful night. The rooftop was stunning, offering a panoramic view of the city that stretched out in all directions like a constellation of possibilities. The air was crisp, but not uncomfortable, and fairy lights strung between posts gave the space a magical quality. I found myself standing near the railing, taking in the view and feeling oddly contemplative. The day had been emotionally intense, and the combination of alcohol and altitude was making me feel both relaxed and slightly disconnected from reality. Beautiful, isn't it? I turned to find Marcus beside me, 2 drinks in his hands. He offered one to me, something dark and complex smelling. Thank you. I took a sip and was surprised by the warmth that spread through my chest. What is it? Bourbon old-fashioned. The bartender said it was their specialty. He leaned against the railing, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. You seem to be enjoying yourself tonight. I was. Your team, our team. They're good people. They are. He took a sip of his drink, his eyes fixed on the city below. I'm glad you're fitting in. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sounds of conversation and laughter from the rest of the group creating a pleasant backdrop. The night air was getting cooler, and I was starting to regret not bringing a jacket. Here. Marcus shrugged out of his suit jacket and held it out to me. You look cold. I'm fine. Alex, just take the jacket. There was something in his tone, not commanding but gently insistent, that made me accept it. The jacket was warm from his body heat and smelled like that subtle cologne I'd begun to associate with him. I pulled it around my shoulders, hyper-aware of the intimacy of wearing something that belonged to him. Better? I nodded, not trusting my voice. We were standing closer now, the jacket creating a small, private space between us, despite the other people scattered around the rooftop. Can I ask you something? Marcus said, his voice quiet enough that I had to lean in to hear him. Sure. Do you hate me? The question was barely above a whisper, but it hit me like a physical blow. I looked at him, really looked at him. His face was open, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. There was no armor there, no professional polish or careful distance. Just Marcus asking a question I could tell he was terrified to hear the answer to. I used to, I said honestly. Now I think I just wonder who you really are. Something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, mixed with something deeper. I'm trying to figure that out myself. And what have you learned so far? He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on mine. That I spent too many years being the person I thought other people wanted me to be. That I hurt someone who didn't deserve it because I was too afraid to face what that might mean about myself. A pause. That some mistakes take years to understand and even longer to forgive yourself for. The honesty in his voice was devastating. I wanted to reach out to him, to offer some kind of comfort or reassurance, but I wasn't sure I was ready for that level of physical contact. Instead, I settled for words. People change, I said. You're not the same person you were in high school. Neither are you. His eyes searched my face. You're stronger now, more confident, but you still have that same, I don't know how to describe it, that same quiet strength that made me so fucking jealous when we were kids. Jealous? You were so comfortable in your own skin. Even when people were shitty to you, you never tried to be someone else to make them like you. He shook his head. I would have given anything to have that kind of self-possession. I wasn't comfortable. I was just scared of trying and failing, of putting myself out there and being rejected. It was easier to pretend I didn't care than to risk actually caring and getting hurt. Maybe we were both scared, he said softly. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter from across the rooftop. Someone had convinced David to attempt karaoke on their phone, and his enthusiastic but tone-deaf rendition of a classic rock anthem was drawing a crowd. Marcus and I watched the impromptu performance, both of us smiling, despite the emotional intensity of the moment. There was something perfect about the juxtaposition. David's uninhibited joy providing a counterpoint to the careful vulnerability Marcus and I were sharing. "We should probably rejoin the group," Marcus said eventually, though he made no move to leave our spot by the railing. Probably. But neither of us moved. The space between us felt charged with possibility, heavy with things that hadn't been said and might never be said. I was acutely aware of every detail, the way the city lights reflected in Marcus's eyes, the warmth of his jacket around my shoulders, the careful distance he maintained even as he leaned closer. "Alex," he started, but before he could finish whatever he'd been about to say, Jennifer appeared beside us. "There you two are. We're thinking about heading to that late-night coffee place on 5th Street. You want to come?" The moment shattered like glass. Marcus stepped back, putting professional distance between us, and I felt the loss of his proximity like a physical ache. "I should probably head home," I said, shrugging out of his jacket and handing it back to him. "Early morning tomorrow." "Of course." His fingers brushed mine as he took the jacket, and the brief contact sent electricity shooting up my arm. "I'll see you tomorrow." I said my goodbyes to the rest of the group and made my escape. But as I waited for the elevator, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had almost happened on that rooftop. Something that might have changed everything between us, if we'd had just a few more minutes alone. The next few days passed in a blur of normalcy that felt oddly surreal after the intensity of our rooftop conversation. Marcus was professional, friendly, and gave no indication that anything had shifted between us. But I caught him watching me sometimes, and there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before, a kind of careful attention that made my skin prickle with awareness. On Friday afternoon, I was deep in debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "It's Marcus. Got your number from the employee directory. Hope that's okay. Was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee tomorrow morning? There's something I'd like to discuss with you, nothing work-related." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart beating faster than it had any right to. A coffee invitation from my manager shouldn't have felt significant. But everything about Marcus felt significant these days. "Sure," I texted back. "What time and where?" 10 a.m.? There's a place called Grind Coffee on Maple Street. Know it? I knew it. It was a small, independent coffee shop in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where you could have a conversation without being overheard. The choice felt intentional. "I'll be there," I replied. Saturday morning found me standing outside Grind Coffee 15 minutes early, nervous in a way that reminded me of first dates I'd been on years ago. I'd changed my shirt 3 times, settled on dark jeans and a sweater that Emma had once complimented, and then spent the drive over second-guessing everything about my appearance. The coffee shop was exactly what I'd expected: exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, the kind of carefully curated bohemian aesthetic that appealed to freelancers and graduate students. Marcus was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. "I took the liberty of ordering for you," he said as I approached. "Black coffee, no sugar. I hope I remembered correctly." "You did." I settled into the chair across from him, noting that he'd chosen a table far from the other customers. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" "I pay attention." He smiled, but there was something nervous in his expression. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. You said it was important." "It is. At least it is to me." He wrapped his hands around his mug, looking suddenly younger and more uncertain than I'd seen him since my first day at the office. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night, on the rooftop." "What about it?" "You asked who I really am. I've been asking myself the same question for a while now, and I think I finally have an answer, or at least part of one." He took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. The morning light streaming through the windows highlighted the silver at his temples, and I found myself noticing details I'd tried not to see before. The way his eyes crinkled slightly when he was thinking, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the careful way he held himself, even in casual clothes. "I told you I was divorced," he said finally. "What I didn't tell you is that the marriage ended because I finally stopped lying to myself about who I am, about what I want." The implications of his words hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee cup carefully, trying to process what he was telling me. I spent most of my 20s trying to be the person I thought I was supposed to be. Married my college girlfriend because it seemed like the next logical step. Bought a house in the suburbs, adopted a dog, played the part of the successful straight man who had his life figured out. His laugh was bitter. But you can't build a life on a lie, no matter how comfortable that lie might be. What happened? I met someone, another man. He looked up at me, his eyes steady despite the vulnerability in his voice. Nothing happened. I would never have cheated on Sarah, but for the first time in my life, I felt something I'd been pretending didn't exist. And I realized that I couldn't keep pretending. I sat in stunned silence, trying to reconcile this revelation with everything I thought I knew about Marcus Rivera. The confident, popular boy from high school who'd dated cheerleaders and seemed to embody everything our small-minded town considered masculine and desirable. How long have you known? I asked. On some level, probably always, but I got really good at explaining it away, rationalizing it as admiration or envy or just normal guy stuff. He ran a hand through his hair. The truth is, I've been attracted to men for as long as I can remember. But growing up when we did, it wasn't exactly an option I allowed myself to consider. Our small town had been the kind of place where being different in any way made you a target. I remembered the handful of kids who'd been rumored to be gay, how they'd been treated, the casual cruelty they'd faced, the way even teachers and administrators had turned a blind eye to harassment that would have been unacceptable if directed at any other group. So you got married instead, I said. I got married instead, and I convinced myself I was happy, or at least content. But contentment isn't the same thing as fulfillment, and lies have a way of poisoning everything they touch. When did you tell her? 2.5 years ago, it was. He paused, searching for words. It was the hardest conversation of my life. She deserved so much better than what I'd given her. We'd been together for 8 years, and I'd never been fully present, never been able to give her the kind of love she deserved. How did she take it? Better than I expected, honestly. She said she'd suspected for years that something was wrong, that there was a part of me I kept locked away. She was hurt, obviously, and angry, but she was also relieved to finally understand why our relationship had always felt like something was missing. I tried to imagine that conversation, the courage it must have taken to shatter a life you'd spent years building. That must have been terrifying. Terrifying and liberating at the same time. For the first time in my adult life, I was being completely honest with someone about who I really am. He looked at me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. It's a kind of freedom I didn't know was possible. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his confession settling between us. I understood now why he'd been so different from the boy I remembered. He'd spent years learning to live authentically, stripping away the layers of pretense and performance that had defined his youth. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because I owe you the truth, all of it. He leaned forward, his eyes never leaving mine. In high school, you weren't just some random target for my insecurity and fear. You were the person I found myself thinking about when I should have been thinking about my girlfriend. You were the person whose attention I craved, even as I was pushing you away. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt my face flush, my heart racing as the full implications of what he was saying sank in. I used to watch you in calculus class, the way you'd get completely absorbed in a problem, how your whole face would change when you finally figured out a solution. I used to time my trips to the library so I might run into you there. I knew your schedule better than my own. Marcus, I'm not telling you this because I expect anything from you, he said quickly. I know I have no right to your forgiveness, much less anything more than that. I needed you to know that my cruelty toward you came from a very specific place. I was 17 and terrified and dealing with feelings I didn't have words for. And instead of facing them, I tried to destroy the person who inspired them. I stared at him, my mind reeling. Marcus Rivera had been attracted to me in high school. All those cruel comments, the pointed harassment, the way he'd seemed to single me out for punishment, it had all been the behavior of a scared, closeted teenager who didn't know how to process his own desires. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to have the whole truth. He finished his coffee and started to stand. I should let you get on with your weekend. Wait. The word came out more urgently than I'd intended. Don't go. Not yet. He settled back into his chair, watching me with careful attention. I need to process this, I said. What you've told me. It changes everything. Does it? I thought about the boy I'd been at 17, lonely, invisible, convinced that I was fundamentally unlovable. How different might my high school experience have been if I'd known that the person whose cruelty hurt me most had actually been struggling with attraction to me? I spent years thinking there was something wrong with me, I said, that I was so obviously defective that even casual acquaintances felt compelled to point it out. Marcus's face crumpled. Alex, no. There was never anything wrong with you. The problem was entirely mine. I know that intellectually, but knowing something and feeling it are different things. I met his eyes. What you've told me today, it doesn't erase the hurt, but it does help me understand it differently. I hope that's a start, he said quietly. It is. I took a breath, gathering courage for what I was about to admit. I need to tell you something, too. I had a crush on you in high school, a massive, embarrassing, all-consuming crush that I spent 2 years trying to hide. His eyes widened. What? You were everything I thought I wanted to be. Confident, popular, comfortable, in your own skin. At least that's how it looked from the outside. And despite everything you did to me, part of me never stopped being attracted to you. I felt my face burning with embarrassment, but pressed on. Do you have any idea how confusing that was? To be hurt by someone and still find yourself watching them across the cafeteria? Still feel your heart race when they looked in your direction? Jesus, Marcus breathed. We were both so fucked up. We were teenagers. Being fucked up was basically our job description. He laughed, a sound that was equal parts amusement and pain. What a mess we made of everything. Yeah, but we're not 17 anymore. No, we're not. His voice was soft, almost wondering. We're not. The coffee shop had filled up while we talked, the Saturday morning crowd of joggers and students creating a pleasant buzz of activity around us. But our corner table felt separate from all of it, like we existed in our own private bubble of honesty and possibility. What happens now? I asked. I don't know. He leaned back in his chair, studying my face. What do you want to happen? It was a loaded question, one that I wasn't sure I was ready to answer fully. But looking at Marcus, really looking at him, seeing the man he'd become rather than the boy he'd been, I realized that something fundamental had shifted in how I saw him. I want to get to know you, I said finally. The real you, not the professional version or the high school version. I want to understand who Marcus Rivera actually is when he's not trying to be anyone else. I'd like that too, he said. More than you know. We left the coffee shop together, stepping out into a crisp autumn morning that felt full of possibility. The conversation had been emotionally draining, but there was also something liberating about having everything out in the open. Would you like to walk for a bit? Marcus asked. There's a park a few blocks from here. The park was one of those urban green spaces that felt like a small miracle in the middle of the city. Tree-lined paths wound around a small pond, and benches were strategically placed to take advantage of particularly scenic views. We walked slowly, not touching, but closer than we'd ever been as colleagues. Closer than we'd ever been as anything. Can I ask you something? I said as we paused beside the pond to watch a family of ducks navigate the shallow water. Of course. When did you know? About yourself, I mean. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the water. I think part of me always knew, but I got really good at not knowing, if that makes sense. It wasn't until I was married and supposedly living the life I'd always thought I wanted that I couldn't ignore it anymore. What changed? I started therapy after I hurt my back in that half marathon I mentioned. The physical therapy led to some conversations about stress and lifestyle, which led to some recommendations about dealing with anxiety and depression I didn't even realize I was carrying. He smiled ruefully. Amazing how much you can learn about yourself when you finally stop running long enough to pay attention. And that's when you met him, the man you mentioned? David, he was a physical therapist at the clinic. Nothing dramatic or romantic, just a genuinely kind person who treated me like a human being rather than another appointment in his schedule. Marcus's expression softened with memory. We became friends, and then one day he mentioned his boyfriend, and something about the casual way he talked about his life made me realize I'd never felt that kind of ease about my own relationships. Did you tell him how you felt? God, no. The poor guy was just trying to do his job. But being around him made me realize how much energy I'd been putting into being someone I wasn't. He turned to look at me. That's when I knew I couldn't keep living a lie. We resumed walking, following a path that curved around the pond and through a small grove of trees that were just beginning to turn autumn colors. The morning was beautiful, crisp, and clear, and I found myself thinking that this was the kind of day that should be preserved in memory. The kind of moment that feels significant even as it's happening. What about you? Marcus asked. When did you know? I think I've always been attracted to men, but it took me a long time to stop hoping it was a phase or something I could change. I kicked at a pile of fallen leaves. Growing up where we did, being gay wasn't exactly presented as a viable option. No, it wasn't. I came out to myself in college, came out to my parents a year after graduation. They took it better than I expected, but there was definitely an adjustment period. I glanced at him. What about your family? Still working on that conversation, he admitted. My parents are traditional. They loved Sarah and they don't understand why I would give up what they saw as a perfect life. I've told them we grew apart, but I haven't had the courage to tell them the whole truth yet. That must be hard. It is, but lying to them feels worse than their potential disappointment. He stopped walking and turned to face me. I'm tired of living in pieces, you know? Tired of being one person at work, another person with my family, another person when I'm alone. I want to be the same person everywhere. There was something beautiful about his honesty, the way he was willing to be vulnerable, despite not knowing how I'd respond. This was the Marcus I was beginning to understand, someone who'd learned the hard way that authenticity was worth almost any cost. I think that's brave, I said. I think it's overdue. He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes completely. But thank you. We'd completed the circuit around the pond and found ourselves back at the park's entrance. The morning had stretched into early afternoon, and I was surprised by how quickly the time had passed. I should probably let you get on with your day, Marcus said, though he seemed as reluctant as I felt to end this conversation. Probably. But neither of us moved toward our cars. Alex? His voice was soft, uncertain. I know this is complicated. Work, our history, everything, but I'd like to see you again. Outside of the office, I mean, as... He struggled for the right words. As whatever this is. I looked at him, really looked at him. The man standing in front of me bore some resemblance to the boy who'd made my teenage years miserable. But he was also someone entirely new. Someone who'd learned to carry his mistakes with grace. Who'd found the courage to rebuild his life around honesty rather than convenience. I'd like that too, he said. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Really, but you're right. It is complicated. We work together and there are professional considerations to think about. We'll figure it out, he said. That we don't have to figure it all out today, but we'll figure it out. I nodded, feeling something settle in my chest that I hadn't even realized was tense. Okay. We walked to our cars together and I was acutely aware of the space between us. Close enough to feel connected and far enough apart to maintain the careful boundaries we weren't quite ready to cross. Thank you, Marcus said as we reached my car, for listening today, for giving me a chance to explain. Thank you for being honest with me about all of it. He nodded, then seemed to wrestle with something internal.